Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on Swish City. I'm your host, Bruce Veliz, and in today's episode, we're going to be doing another one of our NBA offseason breakdowns and season previews as we dive into each team going into the 2025-2026 NBA season. In today's episode, we're going to be diving in and talking about the Memphis Grizzlies, a team in the Western Conference that is dealing with some injuries to start in the season and ultimately may hinder their ability to grow in a deep Western Conference. So we're going to be breaking down, going all of the jazz over on the Grizzlies. If you do enjoy the content, make sure to let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section if you agree, if you disagree, and to hit that subscribe button if you do enjoy the content, as we're going to be breaking down, like I said, every single team before the season starts, and then throughout the season having some great topics diving into the NBA and teams and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's dive into the Memphis Grizzlies. And like I kind of alluded to earlier in the introduction, the Grizzlies are in a little bit of a weird spot. I personally would have had them a little bit higher going into the season if we weren't starting the year with how they are looking, with all these injuries really coming into play. As we've already seen their two star players be stunted to start the year, with Jaren Jackson Jr. having to do a procedure in the offseason, and then now Ja Morant recently just getting injured. And with these two injuries coming into play, it really does shape the Memphis Grizzlies to be in a little bit in a rough spot in this tough Western Conference. As we look at their roster, without those two players, it is some veterans and young talent they're really putting their trust in to once again dominate in the West. Now, we have seen with the Grizzlies them have that success with their injuries coming into play and guys really stepping up to really replicate the value of their stars, and from two-way contracts to getting guaranteed deals and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe the Grizzlies do have that young talent to really hold up, but ultimately I don't necessarily think so. So let's go over the additions, subtractions for this Grizzlies team here. So as you all know, we dive into the additions first, so let's look at that. The Grizzlies made two additions via trade this off season, and you see two and might be a little bit questioned, but that's where the asterisk goes into play, which we'll get into in a little bit. But two players that they did add this offseason via trade were Justinian Jessup and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. As we all know, the Grizzlies made the first big splash of the offseason, trading away Desmond Bane and freeing up some cap space to bring in some younger talent. They got some draft picks alongside Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Cole Anthony. They ultimately ended up to decide and waive Cole Anthony, which allowed him to sign somewhere else. Therefore, they only really retained Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who they're hoping can be that 3-and-D scorer that they saw just a couple years ago, and not the one that they unfortunately saw last season with the Memphis Grizzlies, struggling from three-point percentage and not being that valuable on that end. Justinian Jessup was also acquired in the deal on draft night, where they acquired his draft rights. I'm sure he's going to be playing overseas, but once again, like I mentioned with the Grizzlies, they have the ability to turn up the most young talent across the NBA, so I would not be shocked if Jessup gets an opportunity at some point with the Grizzlies down the road. The Grizzlies also made two signings this offseason, bringing in Ty Jerome and Jock Landale. Jerome, obviously, last season had a fantastic year with the Cleveland Cavaliers, filling in and being that backup point guard, something the Cavaliers have desperately lacked these last couple of seasons, and ultimately helped them lead into their second unit. He now goes over to Memphis to kind of play that role behind Ja Morant, who once again is going to be dealing with injuries to start the season, so may get the starting job, where he ultimately was very effective in some points for the Cavaliers when he was used in those starting lineups to close out games. Jerome obviously is looking to replicate a role that Tyus Jones recently played for this Grizzlies team that was very effective when they were at the top of the Western Conference, and hopefully he can be able to fill in that hole. They also brought in, like I mentioned, Jock Landale, who was recently waived by the Houston Rockets. He is someone that is going to come in and just be a tertiary center for this lineup, but could get some burn within this team. They also made 4 draft selections here, the first one being with Cedric Coward, the wing, who had a lot of eyes on him with a bunch of untapped potential. He was supposed to go to Duke, but when he went to the draft combine, they told him to stay. He would be a lottery pick. He wound up being so when the Grizzlies traded with the Portland Trailblazers to select Coward, 5 selections than what they were previously selected at pick 16. 2018. This allowed them to get their young guy that they hopefully will be able to turn into this dynamic wing to be partnered as that second or third star alongside John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., basically trading away Desmond Bane and his ability to hopefully get that in Cedric Howard on a cheaper value. They also drafted 3 picks in the second round, taking Javon Small, Will Richard, and Jamal Mashchak. These 3 players will also be competing for the roster spots here over in Memphis as they look to ultimately make this roster as well. A majority of them most likely are going to be going to that G League, but as you can see, Javon Small is one of those two-way contracts that the team does have, alongside PJ Hall, who obviously dominated for Clemson in the March Madness tournament just 2 seasons ago and played with the Charlotte Hornets on a two-way last year, and Olivier Maxence Prosper, the wing that recently just got waived by the Dallas Mavericks. Maxence Prosper, Javon Small, PJ Hall all have some nice upside. And once again, for a Grizzlies team that likes to buy into young talent and can instantly turn around young talent like they have in the past, this is something that I could see happening with any of these 3 players and maybe having a shocking surprise within Memphis. So now that we went over the additions, let's look at the subtractions and who left this Memphis Grizzlies team. As like I alluded to, they obviously made that big trade, sending away Desmond Bane over to the Orlando Magic, where he's going to be that third scorer alongside Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, something that they clearly lacked not only in the season, but also in the playoffs. That was clearly put on display when they took on the Boston Celtics. Their defense is impeccable, and I think Bane's going to fit right in. For Memphis, it made sense for them to move off of him because this core of John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson was not going to do anything in this Western Conference. So moving off of him, getting some younger draft capital, still getting a veteran in KCP who could still play that starting role, maybe not as effectively, but still solidly, while allowing your younger guys like Jalen Wells, Vince Williams, Cedric Howard to continue to grow on cheaper contracts is a smart move by the small market team in Memphis. They also moved off Jay Huff, as you can see. They had an abundance of centers and needed to re-sign Santi Aldama, so by doing so, they moved off of Jay Huff and trading him to the Indiana Pacers, which they recently just lost Miles Turner, with him signing to the Milwaukee Bucks in free agency, allowing them to fill in that hole at their center position, something that the Memphis Grizzlies had an abundance of. The Grizzlies also lost multiple players in free agency, this time with bringing in new guys. That's obviously going to be the case, with one of their key rotational players being Luke Kennard, their sharpshooting wing is now going to be signing with the Atlanta Hawks. This is something that the Grizzlies are desperately going to miss, as ultimately, besides Santi Aldama, they don't have that dominant three-point shooter or scorer within this lineup. But I do believe that the Grizzlies will utilize guys, once again, like Cedric Howard, and maybe even give Cam Spencer some more burn in this rotation to be able to supplement that three-point scoring. They also lost 2 two-way contracts in Zion Pullen and Yuki Kawamura, as both of those players are now signed over with 2 other teams. Yuki Kawamura signed a 2-way with the Chicago Bulls recently, and Zion Pullen is on an Exhibit 10 day, trying to compete in training camp with the Minnesota Timberwolves to find himself within the Iowa Wolves 2-way spots or rotation. Both of those players, once again, were kind of on the bottom of the depth chart for Memphis, so trying to find themselves new homes does make sense. And then lastly, Cole Anthony, who was once again traded from the Orlando Magic to the Memphis Grizzlies, was waived by this team. He ultimately does leave once he was waived, as he signs with the Milwaukee Bucks on a veteran minimum contract, trying to impress. Obviously, Anthony had fallen within that Orlando Magic rotation after being one of their newer pieces for their rebuild once they kind of traded away Nikola Vucevic, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, and kind of went on that reset. Ultimately, he never lived up to be that, top tier scorer, kind of plays in that 6-man role. And for the Orlando Magic, they obviously needed to replace that with Desmond Bane, but ultimately have a lot of other players that can similarly play that role that are still on that roster, and younger guys like Jet Howard and etc. Therefore, they didn't need Anthony's contract. He gets moved off of. The Grizzlies could have utilized him, but obviously still have some young talent they would have rather obviously benefited with Scottie Pippen Jr. signing Ty Jerome, drafting Cedric Howard, having Cam Spencer. So it makes sense why the Grizzlies move off of Cole Anthony. He ultimately gets waived. He goes and signs with the Orlando Magic, like I mentioned, and going to Milwaukee, I think is going to be a big thing for him, because Milwaukee obviously needs a lot of scoring around Giannis, and that's what Cole Anthony does. He's a perfect three-point scorer, so I'm excited to see what he can bring for the Bucks team out there on the wing. And then lastly, the only player that left this team that did not get signed was Lamar Stevens, and he went and signed overseas, going and playing with the Paris team over in France. Lamar Stevens, the last couple of seasons, had bounced around the league playing with the Boston Celtics, then getting traded to the Grizzlies at the second half of last year. He ultimately then got re-signed by the Grizzlies halfway through the season and was a rotational player for them at the end of their bench, but never really panned out in the NBA, never really stuck, so he's going overseas to try to have some success there. So with that being said, we talked about everyone that left for the Memphis Grizzlies. We broke down who got added for the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's go over their depth chart. So when looking at the Grizzlies depth chart, we can see that obviously there are going to be some injuries coming into play. And with my depth charts, we all know that these are their projected starting lineups if everyone was healthy. So I think Ja, KCP, Jalen Wells, Jaren Jackson, and Zach Edey will be the starting lineup. But as we all know, Jaren Jackson's dealing with injuries. Ja recently just got injured. Zach Edey is going to be out for a little while. So this will not be the clear starting lineup with this team. So the guys will have to step up and fill in. Guys like Santi Aldama, who had a fantastic year last year and someone that really complements the Memphis Grizzlies, his ability to space and play on the outside perimeter, complementing both bigs in Jaren Jackson and Zach Edey, who like to dominate the paint. Like I mentioned, they signed Jock Landale to be that extra insurance, and hopefully he can be pretty solid as well. Now, looking into that power forward room, Jaren Jackson is hopefully, assumingly, going to be that number one star for this team. But we could also expect guys like G.G. Jackson to really break out playing at this power forward position, another dominant wing who's had some success. And Brandon Clark has also dealt with some injuries, and he's going to be out for the start of the year. He's another one that is a little bit of a weirder player for the Grizzlies because he's had some success but hasn't been able to stay healthy to be available for this team. And with him being on a little bit of an albatross contract at $12 million in the new CBA, he kind of presents himself stuck unless they use him as a salary dump. We'll have to keep an eye on him if he gets some availability with the Grizzlies. Then we look at the small forward room. It's Jalen Wells and Vince Williams Jr., two young wings that have both succeeded in the past two seasons for the Grizzlies, hoping to thrive within this rotation. Then we look at the shooting guards. KCP, obviously the veteran, looking to reprise his role, getting back into that consistent shooting form and being an effective defender for Memphis. But then you got Cedric Howard, who can play into that small forward room and shooting guard room, really trying to step up and develop to be that next star. Cam Spencer, who is also another very intriguing piece for the Memphis Grizzlies, in my opinion, as that scorer. He had some success with them in the Summer League last year and in the Summer League this season, so I expect him to be a key rotational piece with Luke Kennard being missing. John Conchar, another one that kind of falls very similar to Brandon Clark, someone that they've tried to trade in the past, a little bit of an effective defender, but with his contract in the new CBA, it doesn't look that great. Could be a tradable contract for them alongside Clark when we get to the deadline. And then looking at the point guard room, you obviously have John Morant, Ty Jerome, and Scottie Pippen Jr. Unfortunately, for Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr., with John Morant being there, it is going to hinder their ability to play within these lineups, but maybe we do see a little bit of redundancy with Caldwell Pope getting some minutes taken away with both of these young guys coming in, Cedric Howard moving into the three, Spencer playing that backup too, and there's a little bit more of an easier run rotation for their guard room, because I do think that Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr. have both shown to be very successful for this Memphis Grizzlies, to be successful in the NBA, and I think can be for this Memphis Grizzlies team in controlling the offense, controlling that pace, and really setting up this team and what they're supposed to do. So ultimately, where do the Memphis Grizzlies fall? Well, there was some debate with them and another team, which I talked about yesterday, which I did have the Grizzlies on a little bit ahead of them, and then in the debate. But with these injuries, it kind of made me teeter-totter, but ultimately I did say that the Grizzlies fall in 11th. They unfortunately just missed the play-in here, right above the Blazers, Kings, Pelicans, and Jazz. I think they're better than all these teams because when you look on paper, the roster with the names just kind of say they are better, and I think they mesh a little bit better as well. But ultimately, I do think the Grizzlies will be the team riddled by injuries throughout the season that are going to put themselves in this play-in spot. I ultimately do think if they were healthy, they would be a playoff team and would be a very exciting low playoff team that could, prove that maybe, this year they don't have the value there, but with them continuing to get better with their younger stars, eventually they'll be able to get to that promised land of where they were just a few seasons ago, dominating the West. But ultimately, with the West being so strong, these injuries do come into play, and we do see the Grizzlies in a situation like this. Maybe they do realize it's fully time to reset. Try to trade John Morant, fully build around Jaren Jackson Jr., and really try to invest in getting another young guard into this rotation that can kind of supplement them and play alongside them, with Cedric Howard playing that small forward role. But ultimately, that's my breakdown on the Memphis Grizzlies. Like I said, they made a lot of additions, a lot of subtractions as well, losing Desmond Bane, Jay Huff, Luke Kennard, Zion Pullen, Yuki Kawamura, and Cole Anthony. But with these additions, I do think they'll still be a solid team. The West just unfortunately got a lot deeper, and with them coming into the season already dealing with injuries, that just raises a little bit of concern on my end. But like I said, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode here on Swish City, where we broke down the Memphis Grizzlies. And like I said, We're doing every single team going into the year. So if you enjoy the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If your team hasn't been mentioned, your team will be mentioned. So make sure to stay tuned and let me know your thoughts when they do come up. And then, like I said, in the season, we'll have a bunch of videos talking about specific teams, specific players, breaking down what you guys want to do regarding the NBA. I'm going to be going fully hard onto Switch City this year with my writing. So if you do want to keep up to date with me, I really do appreciate it. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. But once again, thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day. And peace out, everyone.